Hi. Oh man, I am so excited to be here. This is my first time ever in the Central Coast, and I am loving it. I flew into the US a couple of weeks ago, was down in LA, and then came up here on Monday. I feel like I've seen a lot of the Central Coast in the last week. It has been beautiful. We went and saw the massive seals that are on the beach. That all just what the heck? They were just like lying there, but I thought they were dead. They were not. And then I put it up on my Instagram because I thought it was funny. And then everyone commented back, and they're like, Jazz, why are you posting dead seals? So I nearly got cancelled for that. So I had to justify, they're not dead, they're just sleeping. But man, it is beautiful. I love the Central Coast. I'm so excited to be here. Like Pastor John said, I am a mental health advocate. I am an author. I'm a director. And I don't like to admit this, some may call me a TikToker. Yeah. I got on the app last year in lockdown, as I think a lot of people did, and I just started by scrolling, and then kind of 5 hours later I was still scrolling, and I was like, this is great. So I started posting on there just kind of videos about my story and about mental health, and people started engaging with it, and they started enjoying the content. And fast forward a few months, I was sitting there and I was on something called a TikTok live. It's where you sit there and you're basically talking live to a whole lot of people, and they can comment. And someone commented, and they're like, hey, Jazz, if you ever get to 1 million followers, you have to skydive and jump out of a plane. And I was like, okay, it's not going to happen, sure. It happened. This is me jumping out of a plane. I was really excited. As you can tell, big smile, was great. My thumbs are up. It was wonderful. This was down in Thornton in New Zealand. It was a wonderful time, and I would prefer that you just thought this is what I looked like the whole time that I was skydiving. It wasn't. This is when I was just going out of the plane. We had literally kind of just leaped off, and that's what, just to give you another look there, that's more it. And then we kind of went to like this. There was all this kind of fog going on. We were going through the clouds, and I couldn't breathe, so I was like kind of trying to breathe, and then a little bit of that. I don't know what my hands are doing. They're like, help! Trying to like cling on to my skydive instructor. And then there was a lot of this as well, just a lot of screaming. And the reason that I wanted to show you these is that a lot of you probably don't know me, and this is your first time seeing me, and I'm here on a stage. And I know that for me, when I was younger, when I would hear people's stories, it was really hard for me to understand past that first photo. Oh, hello. That's me screaming again. There we go. It was really hard for me to see past what was in front of me, and so I want you to know today that as I'm sharing with you, man, there was a journey. There was such a journey. It hasn't always been like this. I haven't always been a confident speaker. I haven't always been the person that is in front of you today. There was a massive journey, and it is my privilege, my absolute privilege today to share with you that journey. So I was born down in the South Island of New Zealand in a tiny little town called Timaru. And I remember I was a kid who was obsessed with Barney the dinosaur. Yeah? Someone say, yeah, I was obsessed with Barney. I love Barney. And I remember when I got to like 3 years old, right? 3 is kind of the age where you just start asking lots of questions. Like, Mom, why is the sky blue? Dad, why this? When I was 3, the kind of questions that I was asking, they were very different. The kind of questions that I was asking as a 3-year-old were, why is he hurting me? And why can't I tell anyone? At the age of 3, my story began to change. At the age of 3, it was the very first time that I was sexually abused, and I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand the impact that would have, but as I got older, my thinking and my perceptions and things that had been ingrained in me as a 3-year-old, they began to develop. And I remember starting school, and when I was about 7 years old, I have this core memory of being out on the playground. And I remember being on the monkey bars, and I was on this side, and I went across, and when I landed, I heard a whole lot of kids laughing. I didn't know what was going on, and so I turned around, and one of the kids piped up, and she said, no one's going to touch those now because no one wants to catch your disease. Now, what you have to understand is that I'm here right now as a 26-year-old. That might not mean anything. But to a 7-year-old, that was everything. As a 7-year-old, that began to develop these beliefs in me that maybe I'm not good enough, and maybe I don't belong, and maybe I shouldn't be here. And as I was going home, there was a whole lot of stuff happening at home, and I was going to school, and I was getting bullied at school, and I just felt like I was in this whirlwind. And when I was 12 years old, I made this decision that no 12-year-old should ever make, and that was the decision to try and end my own life. As a 12-year-old, I don't know if I necessarily understood the reality of what that meant. All I knew was that I just wanted the pain to stop. All I knew is that I wanted this whirlwind to stop. I didn't want to go to school and be bullied at school. I didn't want to go home and be hurt at home. I just wanted it to stop. Now, a couple weeks after that, I got invited down to this event that was happening called the Revolution Tour. And I remember standing in the crowd as a teenager, as a 12-year-old, and this man walks on the stage, this big black American man with a saxophone. His name is Reggie Dabbs. And I was like, oh my gosh, who is this guy? And he started sharing his story, right? He started sharing his story of when he was younger, that he was adopted out to his mum's favorite teacher, that his mum had slept with a man for $20, and he was the result of that, and how he battled for so many years with brokenness. And then he started talking about this man called Jesus. And he started talking about this hope that he had found. And I remember standing there as a 12-year-old and hearing Reggie say, remember, in all things there is hope. In all things there is hope. And I'm standing there as a 12-year-old who is in this whirlwind, who had just attempted to take her own life. And I remember looking at him and going, in all things there is hope. In all things there is hope. And one day I want to do that. Maybe one day I could do what he is doing. And that night I gave my life to Jesus. And I was actually, the wonderful Pastor Esther Greenwood was also there. And she came down and she did my salvation prayer. And I remember as a 12-year-old going, okay, there is always hope, there is always hope. And I went back up to Timaru. This had happened just down the line, 2 hours away from where I lived. And as soon as I got back, life was still... home life was still pretty average, and school life was still pretty average, but there was this tiny little bit inside of me that there was always hope. And as life kind of continued, I when I was about 16 years old, I was like, man, I got to get out of here. I can't keep living like this. Still home life terrible, school life terrible. I need to get out. And so I took up a part-time job at a fish and chip shop, which was super fun because I'm allergic to seafood. So I was like, go, deep it. It was a great time. Lots of EpiPens. But it was the only job that I could get as a 16-year-old, right? So I'd go to school from 9 till 3. That's the time that we go to school. Apparently, y'all go to school super early here. Why? Oh my goodness. So we start at 9, so 9 till 3 I would go to school, and then I would go and I would work at the fish and chip shop all night. I would close the store. I did that every day, and then Saturdays I was working, and I saved up enough money, and I remember going up to my mum and saying, I'm leaving. I'm going to go to Auckland. I booked a one-way ticket. I went up to Auckland, and she was like, okay, whatever, and I left. And I remember thinking as I landed, yeah, this is going to be great. Because you see, all of my issues were in Timaru, right? All of my issues were there, so now that I'm moving location, everything will be fine. No. That was not the case, because you see, I could run away from my location, sure. I could run away from my school. I could run away from my family. I could run away from that, but I couldn't run away from myself. I couldn't run away from these beliefs that had been developed in me. I couldn't run away from the identity that I had thought was who I was. I couldn't run away from that stuff. So I got to Auckland, and I found a house on a thing called Trade Me over there, which is like an online kind of thing where you can find different places. And I remember in the first 2 years of living there, I ended up living in 15 different houses. My life completely flipped on its head, and then I ended up finding my way into a Kupa's church. I had been invited to this women's event by a friend of mine, and I remember walking into this thing that we have in Auckland called the Mercury Theatre, and I walked in, and then I see someone, and it was Pastor Esther. And this 12-year-old girl she did my salvation prayer. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's the person from when I was 12 years old. And I remembered, in all things there is hope. In all things there is hope. And I started attending a Kupa's church. And I remember kind of turning up on a Sunday, doing the Sunday thing. And then Monday through to Saturday, I was still struggling. Monday through to Saturday, these beliefs were still there. Monday through to Saturday, the identity was still wrapped up in these things. And for many years after that, I ended up in hospital, psych wards. I was in a coma. My life was just in this spin of I don't deserve to be here. I am a burden. I'm unlovable. The world is better with me gone. And I wholeheartedly believed that. Because what had happened was that all of these different situations, all of these these things, the childhood trauma, the bullying at school, everything had developed into this is who I am, therefore it will never change. These things are my identity, therefore it doesn't matter how much therapy I do, this is just who I am. And so I lived with this for so long, and I remember when I was about 19 years old, I was working at a gym at the time, and I had some kind of falling out with my manager, and at this point, I was still in church, but I hadn't really been talking to too many people about what was going on. Pastor Esther knew, a couple of other people knew, but I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed of my situation and that things had spiraled again, and I was feeling this way again. And so I remember after this argument with my manager, I jumped online and I booked a one-way ticket to Australia. And I remember thinking at the time, yeah, this is it. See, if I go to Australia, then all of my issues will be gone. Same logic that I had as a 16-year-old, right? And I remember doing what any stupid teenager back then would do, and it was about 2 hours after I booked the flight, Facebook status, moving to Australia. So now I was like, now it's Facebook official, I have to go, right? I went and sold like all of my stuff. I sold my car, I packed everything up in my suitcases, and I was like, I'm gone. And I remember telling everyone that I was going because I had been accepted into acting school. And so everything was set up and it was great, and I came back into church for a little bit. At this point, I had kind of walked away because of the shame and the guilt and everything that was going on. And just before I left, I remember walking back in, and this man, Pastor Wayne Huirua, he was standing in the foyer. And he came up to me and he said, Jazz, if you go to Australia and everything falls on its face and nothing changes, then I want you to come home. And I was like, no, because you see, I'm enrolled in this acting school, right? So it's going to be great, and I've got a community, everything set up. And he was like, no, Jazz, if you go over there and nothing changes, you got to come home. And I packed one suitcase, everything else I had sold and gotten rid of, and I flew over to Australia. And within the first few days, my life completely and utterly fell on its face. In the first few days, I was suddenly talking in a way that I had never talked before. I was behaving in a way that I hadn't behaved before. I was living my life in a way that I hadn't really lived before, because suddenly the accountability of home was gone. And I was in this different city, and one morning I was sitting there, I was just bawling my eyes out, and I was like, I don't know what I've done. I've made a mistake. I shouldn't have ever come here. And then this girl messages me on Snapchat. And she, out of the blue, I've known her for a while, but we'd only had a few conversations. And she said to me, Jazz, I just feel like God is saying it's okay to go home. It's okay to go home. And I replied to her, and I was like, no, it's all good, because you see, I'm enrolled in this acting school here, and it's really great. And she was like, no, Jazz, it's okay to go home. And I was like, no, but I made it Facebook official, right? So everyone knows that I'm in Australia. So if I come back, everyone's going to think that I failed. Jazz, it's okay to go home. Not everyone's world is revolving around you. They're not all going to look at you and go, wow, she's back, she failed. No, it's okay to go home. And after a conversation with her, I ended up packing my one suitcase, and I went back home. I flew back to New Zealand, and when I landed, I had literally just the suitcase that I packed. I didn't have anything else. I had blown all the money that I had, and for the next few months, I ended up in psych wards. I ended up back in hospitals, just so much shame-filled. And I remember professionals saying that I was a lost cause, that it was chronic, that this was just the way that it was always going to be. And there was this one time after my final attempt that I had a conversation that quite literally sparked the biggest change of my life. It was a conversation with the wonderful Pastor Esther, and I was just sitting there bawling my eyes out, and she just looked at me and she said, Jazz, why are you crying? And I looked at her and I was like, I'm just so tired of fighting. And she looked at me and she said, Jazz, what do you think the definition of fighting is? Because I don't think that you've been fighting. I think you're only surviving. And it's only when you learn how to fight, that's when the change that you're longing to see is going to happen. How wise is Pastor Esther? And not going to lie, I was a little bit offended at the start. I was like, I've been fighting real hard for the last 9 years. How dare you say that? But I went back, right, and I looked at the definitions of surviving and fighting, and here's what I found. The definition of surviving is to continue to live or exist in hardship, manage to keep going in difficult circumstances. Now, having a survival instinct, it's important. It's what keeps us going when times are tough, but it also is what keeps us just accepting this is my identity, therefore it will never change. Just managing it. When I looked at the definition of fighting, it said this: to engage in a battle or war, fight to overcome and destroy an adversity. That is very different to the definition of surviving. To engage in a battle or war, fight to overcome and destroy an adversity. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, if I've actually just been surviving this whole time and fighting is going to change something, I've got to learn how to do that. And so slowly but surely I began looking at, okay, what does fighting look like in my own life? And I quickly came to discover that I wasn't fighting the suicidal tendencies. I was fighting the beliefs that put me there. I was fighting the beliefs that would tell me I'm not good enough, that would tell me I was a burden, that would tell me I was unlovable. And so what I did to fight is that I wrote them down on a piece of paper. I drew a line, and on the other side, I wrote down everything that people said or did that contradicted those beliefs. Drew another line, and I found every single scripture that I could that combated those beliefs. So that every time my mind would say, Jazz, you're unlovable, Jazz, you're a burden, you don't deserve to be here, I would pull out this list, and I would have solid evidence in front of me that my internal reality wasn't matching the external truth. I started going into therapy and actually listening to what they were saying. There was a part of me that was like, hey, you know what? Maybe they studied for like 5 years and they might know what they're talking about. Because I would previously go in, right, and I would sit there because I had to as part of a lot of my psych colds, I had to go into therapy. I didn't do anything they told me to because this was my identity, therefore everything you say doesn't matter. But I started to go in with this perception, okay, maybe, just maybe this is not who I am and this is just something that I'm struggling with, therefore it can change, right? So I went and I started engaging and I started doing the things that the therapist was telling me to, and then it got to Christmas Eve. I hated Christmas. I'd always hated Christmas. Christmas was filled with bad memories for me, and I got this call from what we call the crisis team back home. And the crisis team said, Jazz, we're going to call you a lot over the next period of time because this is when we lose the most amount of people in your situation. And as I sat there on my bedroom floor, I had a mattress. I didn't have a bed frame or really anything in my room at that time. I remember going, I don't want to be another statistic. I don't want to. And so I booked a taxi and I went down to the Mercury Theatre at 11 p.m. We had our Christmas Eve service. I knew that we had it because we did it every year. I hadn't come back to church in a very long time at that point. And I remember getting there, standing up like on the corner because I didn't want to go in. I didn't want anyone to see me, so I waited until the service started, right? Then I walked in and I snuck at the back. And then they did the thing that all the introverts hate, where they're like, hey, turn around and say hi to someone that you don't know. And I sat there and I was like, nah! I didn't want anyone to talk to me. I had my hand, put the phone out. That's what I do. I just pull my phone out. Oh man, I just got to reply to this message. And then this girl comes running over to me and she's like, Jazz, oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. How are you? And I had literally probably had maybe 4 conversations with this girl. And then she goes, hey, Jazz, what are you doing for Christmas? And I was like, oh, nothing. I don't like Christmas. I hate Christmas. I'm just being by myself. And she was like, what? No, come have Christmas with me and my family. And I was like, no, thanks. It's okay. I'll just be by myself. It's fine. And she was like, no, Jazz, you can't do that. Just come have Christmas. And the little voice inside of me went, Jazz, you got to start fighting. What does fighting look like in this situation? What does fighting look like? It looks like going against everything inside of you that is saying don't go. And so I ended up agreeing to go to her house for Christmas. And she was like, yeah, sweet. Well, let's just go back to your house now, pack your bags and come stay the night. And I was like, that went really fast. And so now we're at my house. I'm packing my bags. And we have a Christmas Day service the next day, right? And I remember walking into the building. And she didn't tell me she was worship leading the next day. So we were the first ones at the Mercury Theatre. And I couldn't just wait out on the side for everyone to go in. But as I walked in, our senior pastor, Pastor Kathy Monk, was standing there. And I remember looking at her and she just went, oh my gosh, Jazz, hi, it's so good to see you. And I was so confused because she knew my history. She knew everything that had happened. And for some reason, I expected rejection. For some reason, I expected to be pushed away. For some reason, I expected everything else, but that wasn't what I was met with. And I was so confused. But in that moment, I remember looking at her and going, oh my goodness, I'm home. I'm home. I'm home. And for the next few weeks, I started coming back to church, and we had like a massive foyer at our church, and I kind of remember like there was 2 doors on either side. I was so scared at the start. I'd like walk in one door, kind of speed walk, and then just go out the other door because I didn't want anyone to see me. I did that for ages. And then this one day, right? This one day, there was this man preaching. He had come over from, I think, Australia, and he was sharing his story. He was sharing his story about how he had been in a drug-induced psychosis. The TV was talking to him. There was all of these things happening. And then he shares that in this moment, he's lying on his bedroom floor and he's crying out to God, saying, God, I don't want to live like this anymore. God, please just take everything. I will give it all up. God, you just got to move. And he shares the story about in that moment that he was completely set free. And I'm sitting in this theater and I'm like, I need that. God, I need that. And we went out in the afternoon, and I spent that whole afternoon praying, reading through my journals, looking at what it is to fight, reading everything that God says about my identity, researching the stories of people that had overcome, the stories of where God had taken something so broken and turned it into something so whole. And I remember walking back into the service that night, and there was a whole lot of, I remember the praise and worship team. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. The presence of God had filled that place. And you know, when you're going to skydive, the instructor, once you're kind of getting up on the plane, they say to you, the most important thing that you have to know is that you can't grab onto the plane when we jump, or we can't jump. You can't do it. And I was like, but why would we jump out of a perfectly good plane into the air, right? But people have done it. People have tried to grab, and as soon as you grab, you can't jump. And I know that for me, there were so many times where I had been like, God, I don't want to live like this anymore. I'm not going to jump, though, because I need my security over here. I need the control. I need the relationships built upon my crisis. I need to hold on to all these things. Like, I want the freedom, but I also like the comfort of the plane, right? And so I lived like this for so long. And that night, I remember standing in the seat, and the same guy was preaching again. And I felt God say to me, Jazz, take the leap. Jazz, trust me. Trust me, trust me, trust me. And he ended up doing an altar call, and I remember so intentionally stepping out of my seat and running down to the front. And when I did, what happened, right, is that I went from fighting to surrender. I went from, God, I don't know what freedom looks like. God, I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know what it's going to feel like. But what I do know is that I can't keep living like this anymore. So I will give you everything. I will give you the control. I will give you the relationships. I will give you the identity. But when I do, God, please, you got to move. And in that moment, I chose, as scary as it was, to let go of the plane, to let go of everything that I'd been holding on to so tight. And that was a big deal for me, because that's all that I had known. I hadn't known any other way to live. I had read about it in the Bible, and I had seen other people's testimonies, and I knew that it was possible, but I'd always thought, oh, just for them, not for me. But in that moment, oh, okay, this is for me. Okay, Jesus, you died on the cross for me. Okay, Jesus, you have set me free. You have done this for me. And so as I'm standing there, hands lifted, I remember feeling the Holy Spirit fall upon me. And in that moment, Jesus came and he met me where I was at. And if I could have the band come and join me up on stage, I remember walking out of that place, and let me tell you this, after that moment, I never again tried to take my own life. Now, to give you context, yeah, come on. To give you context of that, the reason that everyone said it was chronic was that in my teenage years, I tried 14 times to end my life. So for never again attempting after that moment, what happened when I let go, what happened when I surrendered everything, was that God, every single day, worked to set me free. And let me tell you, it was a process. It was a process, but now I had security in my Father. It was a process, and now I understood that these things were not my identity. I understood that there was hope worth fighting for, and that I wasn't doing it alone. And suddenly, every day, I would wake up with that thought that was no longer just a thought, but it was a fact. Oh, there's always hope. It was a fact. Oh, I am loved. It was a fact. My identity is in Christ. My identity is not in these things that have happened. It is not in the things of the past. And I really love Mark 14, verse 36. It's Jesus crying out to his dad, and he says, "Abba, Father," he cried out, "everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me, yet I want your will to be done, not mine." So in one breath, Jesus is declaring that all things are possible with God, and then with the next, he surrendered to God's will. In one breath, he's saying, "God, I know that everything is possible for you, but God, not my will, but yours be done. Not my will, but yours be done." And there was something significant that happened in my life, and something significant that happens when we choose to stop gripping onto these things and go, "Okay, God, I know all things are possible for you, and I will surrender over to your ways. God, I will surrender over to the way that you want me to live my life. God, I will surrender the hurt. I will surrender the pain. I will surrender the addiction. I will surrender these things. They are not who I am. This is not my identity." And over the next few years, I began to discover my identity in Christ, and things began to heal. And I remember when I was in the intensive care unit of a psych ward, I had this conversation with a man, Pastor Wayne Huirua, who I've mentioned before, and Pastor Libby. Some of you may know them. And Wayne looked at me, and like I said, we were in the intensive care unit of a psych ward. Like, it's bad when you're in the intensive care unit of a psych ward. And he's looking at me, and he goes, Jazz, I think one day your story's going to change the world." And I looked at him, and I was like, "My man, I'm in the intensive care unit of a psych ward." Not only that, to give you context of that situation, when I come back from Australia, I had tried to get a job. I lost that job because of my mental illness, so I was jobless. Because of that, I couldn't pay rent, and I became homeless. And so everything in my life would say that's impossible. Everything about my situation would say I would be another statistic. Everything about the way that I grew up would say that this is how my life should always be. But who knows that in God, all things are possible. All things are possible. And so not too long after this, right, so God had moved on this Sunday night, and I had began doing the work, and that's important. It's really important that then day after day after day, it was a decision to fight. I ended up enrolling in film school. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be able to share the kinds of stories that I had gone through and that other people had gone through, to try and produce hope. And 6 months into film school, my tutors were like, "Hey, we want to put you forward for this annual pitching competition with all of our broadcasters and producers in New Zealand. They've never taken someone your age, and they've never taken a student, but we think you'd be great for it." And I ended up going forward, and there was 35-ish other people pitching that day, all who were 40, had done tons of TV and film before, and I was standing there as a 22-year-old who had done 6 months of film school. And I remember they had these massive PowerPoint presentations and trailers, and I watched as they all pitched. And then last minute, I changed my pitch. I wrote down 3 points on the back of the program. I got up and I pitched, and that day I became New Zealand's youngest funded TV director. I created, thank you, Jesus. I created a TV show about mental health and suicide that went on to win 14 awards around the world. I signed a movie deal. I started to sign book deals. Very soon, I found myself advising the royal family with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. I was standing in front of world leaders speaking at the UN General Assembly. And what Wayne said that day, Jazz, I think one day your story's going to change the world. Now I get to live in that because I chose to surrender, because I chose to fight.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope that message was inspiring, encouraging, and hopefully equipped you for life. And if you're looking to get connected with Equippers Church, you can go to equipperscc.com/connect, fill out a simple form, and someone from our team will be reaching out. You can find all kinds of opportunities to connect, to give, and receive prayer on our website, equipperscc.com. And hey, we really hope to meet you in person sometime, see you in the room. But until then, keep tuning in. We hope that you are blessed by Equippers Church here on YouTube. Love you so much. God bless.